This is a recorded presentation from our WordPress meetup for WordPress St. Petersburg at the Suncoast Developers Guild. Please allow me to introduce our featured speaker, Tom McCracken of Level 10 Interactive, for his presentation of results-oriented Google Analytics.
Good crowd. Thanks for coming out tonight. Fun little projector. Oh, there we go. All right, cool. So yeah, just a little bit. Jim talked a little bit about. Oops. Why is this not advancing? There we go. So just a little bit of information about me. I started an interactive agency in Dallas back in '99. Fell in love with open source. Actually, when I originally started, I did Java work. And then the recession hit in 2001, and suddenly we couldn't afford WebSphere servers and all that kind of stuff. So kind of found some open source projects, like OS Commerce and some other things. Kind of fell in love with open source. And around 2004, we started doing WordPress. But around 2005 or 6, we started getting into some more complex projects that just really WordPress wasn't a great match for, kind of cobbling together, a bunch of different systems. Tried to build our own CMS. That was a big mistake. Built a cool one, but it was way too much work. Went to a really cool one called Silver Stripe, and then eventually did Drupal for about 8 years. But because of just some things that are going on in the Drupal world, it's hard to make projects sustainable. We've kind of importing some of the things that we did over in that world over into the WordPress world. So we support it on 2 different platforms. I think it's going to want me to stay on this. Okay.
It's going to make you stay on.
I also have a background in, and I mentioned a few of these things, so they'll come into play somewhat in this talk. So I have a background in agile project management. And I actually speak on a lot of different topics. I kind of have my feet in a lot of different things. I am a developer, but I also do a lot of things with content marketing and do a lot of things in project management. And in particular, do a lot of things around data and analytics. And so I'm not quite sure. Well, for years, I actually ran the Drupal user group in Dallas. Put on our Drupal camps and all that kind of stuff. And then actually helped out with a WordCamp in 2010 and been helping out a little bit with the Fort Worth group, although they do a really good job with their camp in Dallas. So one of the big things that I like to talk to people about is that people really don't need websites. What they need are results. They need profits. Sort of like, is anyone here a South Park fan? Anyone recognize this slide? So this is a business idea. It's like, okay, we're going to start with this thing. Then we don't know what we're going to do, but we're going to get to profits. And I feel like sometimes this is the way people build websites. It's like, okay, we've got this website. We're going to do stuff, and hopefully we'll get to profits, because all we need is a website. And so the question is, what goes into this question mark? So what I like to say goes into this question mark is we need to build a results-oriented website. And so the first step to this is really kind of 3 legs to it. The first step is we need elements to attract people. Something WordPress is great at with blogs and good designs, things like that, things that attract people to the website, and then build trust. And then once we've built enough trust with our audience, then we can convert them and get them to do and get people to do things that the organization wants to happen. So buy things, become a lead, and so forth. And then really the third part of this leg is we need to always be improving. And this is a little bit of one of my pet peeves with the way many websites are built is a bunch of people get into a room, they come up with a bunch of specs, they go build something, and they let it sit for 5 years. And really, the way to build effective websites is you need to constantly be iterating on it. And so anybody here use Scrum, Agile, project management? So that's a big part of it, is that you're always inspecting and adapting and building something different. The tricky part I found, though, as we got deeper into Scrum, is that because generally you've got a product owner that's saying what all the features should be and what the priorities of the features should be. But what we found was missing in a lot of projects is really what the value of doing these changes are going to be. And really found that a lot of times the product owner might look at things from internally and might be fairly sharp at what they do, but they're not necessarily making decisions based on the impact that these changes are making. And so that's one of the big things we want to kind of tackle and solve starting really about 10 years ago. So there's really kind of 3 major steps to getting to that improved leg. The first part is that a lot of people, they go and they throw something like Google Analytics onto their website. The problem with Google Analytics is the great thing is it gives you 200 some odd different types of measures. But unfortunately, those measures don't really overlap very well with a lot of times the objectives of an organization. Sure, it's great to know how many people are coming to your website, maybe what kind of traffic sources people are using. But it doesn't really tell you, are people buying? Are people submitting forms? Are people sharing content in social and so forth? Okay, so my mouse is just going to keep creeping up this page. This is my mouse pad acting goofy. Let's see if I can stop it. I just got to keep bringing it back down. Okay. So the key to this is that we want to develop, when we're thinking about using Google Analytics, is instead of just doing a stock install, we need to build something called a measurement plan. So we need to figure out what are the important things that the organization wants to happen on this website, and how are we going to measure those things? And sometimes they're easy things to measure. So if someone's submitting a form, it's not that difficult. There's some tricks to it, but it's not that difficult to do. A little bit more complicated is maybe phone calls, particularly measuring phone calls where you're attaching the session with the person who's actually on the website with the phone call. You normally have to do some sort of number switching, so that gets a lot more complicated. But there's this whole range of things where, what can we do to measure things that are actually valuable to the organization? And so, there's different types of websites have different types of things that are typical for their conversion goals. E-commerce, normally we're looking at a purchase. Mainly I'm going to talk about in this presentation lead gen. E-commerce is kind of like its own topic by itself because Google Analytics has got a whole big thing around e-commerce. But most websites are doing lead gen. We want to know when we're getting sales ready leads. People may be requesting a sales call or something like that. Maybe if you're a publishing website, you're wanting people maybe subscribing to your email list, clicking on ads or affiliate links or something like that. If you're doing a branding website, it gets a little bit more abstract, but in general, we want to have people that are engaged, that we're building brand with, that remember our brand in a positive light. And you've got a support website. This is kind of where I started my world, doing like online banking and things like that. We want to know that people got the information they needed. They were able to accomplish what they wanted to on the website without having to contact the call center, which gets very expensive. And so, 5 different types of websites and different types of goals that people have. And this is what's so tricky about Google Analytics. So out of the box, you basically get all this stuff that works on any website. But you don't have these things that are really important that have to be customized depending on what the goals of the site are. But Google Analytics does have a great tool to help measure these things. And in fact, this tool is so powerful that a lot of Google Analytics experts will say things like, if you're not using goals, you're not doing Google Analytics right. And so basically the way goals work is there's something that has to be custom created and custom implemented depending on what your website's doing. But basically the way it works is that there's the structure for all these is that they're going to have a numeric ID. They have a name that's fixed, and then you can pass a value to them. And so, a few things, you get 20 of these per property. So whenever you set up, actually 20 of these per profile. But whenever you set up a Google Analytics account, you've got 20 of these. There's some ways to add more, but in general, it's the way it's typically done. Goals are only counted once per session. So in other words, if you were to make, say, someone sharing your content, social media, a goal, the first time someone does that during a session, and a session generally is when someone has been on the website and they've continuously been on the website for no longer than, say, 30, they haven't been off of it for more than 30 minutes. So all their clicks and going to pages are all within that same 30-minute time span. But so if someone were to share one blog post, say, in Twitter, and they share it again in Facebook, it's only going to count it one time. These could be built by if people hit a specific URL. So a typical thing to do to track a form might be to have a thank you page that after someone submits the form, it redirects them to that page. And then that page can be set up so whenever someone hits this, it triggers a goal. The one bad thing about that approach is if, let's say, there's an ebook that people can download and someone emails their friends this, then it'll create a false goal, a false positive, when people just hit that URL. So sometimes a better way to deal with, say, form submissions is use what's called events. And we can pass JavaScript So that like if someone submits a form, we know that someone got to this page because they actually submitted a form. Or if you've got a form that just kind of returns a message back, you can have JavaScript trigger an event that can trigger a goal. One of the interesting features of goals is that you have this value, and in Google Analytics reporting, that value is treated sort of as a dollar amount, what I'm going to call utility. And so if you say, all right, well, let's have a schedule request a quote form, and you say it's worth 100 points value, $100, what have you. At the end of the day, if you have 10 submissions, Google will say your site generated value of 1,000 today. And then what it'll also do is it'll break it out and say, okay, well, what traffic sources? So let's say 4 of those people who submitted came through organic search. Then it'll say, oh, organic search has delivered $400 worth of value today. If PPC was two submissions, then it's going to say that PPC delivered $200 worth of value. And so this is an important, the way that it deals with this value is very important, that we can now attribute business value back to these different type of entities that are producing these values for us. And of course, help us, one huge reason for doing this, of course, is Google sells ads. And they want you to help you buy properly, or spend the right amount of money so you're getting the right amount of ROI, so you can track what kind of value buying their ads, but you can track anything, so any types of links. Okay, so one of the tricky things that we find whenever we try to sit down and say, all right, let's measure the value thing. So let's use an example. If you've got a website that there's a request a quote form, and of every 4 people that submit that form, 1 becomes a customer. And let's say you've got a phone number, and of every 20 people that call that phone number, 1 becomes a customer. Now, if we set them both up as goals, we can just look at it and go, okay, we had 20 calls and we had 20 form submissions maybe in a day. But what we really want to do is use that value to help weight them. One's a much more better indicator that our website's producing value than the other. And so the value that we pass as a goal is a great way to do that. Ideally, what I like to do is to say, try to think what's sort of the actual sort of dollar value or utility that goal happening is producing for the organization. And there's a few different ways to kind of try to do that. Some people sometimes get hung up with that idea because the numbers are kind of fuzzy. And so another way to think of it is just that it's a weight. And you might say, hey, the schedule an appointment form or the request a quote form is 4 times more valuable than this phone call. And so you might just put in a number that's 4 times more than the other one. Now, it's kind of something really interesting. This kind of comes from a project management side of things, but I think it's very apropos to marketing, is that one of the things that people get hung up on is as humans, we like accurate numbers. And the big thing I'd encourage is it's better to just come up with a good guesstimate and put those numbers in as values. You can iterate on them. As you learn more about them, you can iterate and you can change. So don't worry too much that it's not about the accuracy, because these are going to be assumptions other than if you're doing e-commerce. And even e-commerce is sort of an estimate, because a lot of times you want to know what the profit of buying something is instead of what the retail price of buying something is. But anyway, so just something to remember whenever you're kind of trying to come up with these values, just come up with use some reasonable estimates to kind of come up with something to push through for each one. Now, one of the other things that you kind of quickly learn is that you have sort of these macro goals that are important to measure. But a lot of times what we really want to measure is, are people progressing towards those goals? Or are people doing something that maybe is not a macro goal? So you've got to say a lead generation website, and someone comments on your blog, or someone shares in social media that doesn't necessarily make a sale, but it has some sort of value. And so I like to kind of break things down and say, okay, we've got these macro conversions. These are the big, most important things that an organization wants. But we also have these micro conversions that we really want to track also, because they're important. And you might very well have, and this happens a lot, like when you're doing a lot of content marketing, is that you might have certain blog posts that don't produce sales, but your brand champions love it. So like for years, our agency, we had all our developers always writing articles. And sometimes we had articles that we never really got sales from, but they got passed around on social media, and they helped with our SEO credibility, they helped kind of build our brand, and so forth. And so we wanted to be able to measure the value of all these things. And so the tricky part in Google Analytics with this is that goals only count once, and you only get 20 of them. So you can kind of start burning through these pretty quick, particularly if you're doing something like sharing Twitter, sharing Facebook, sharing whatever. You quickly burn through all of these. So there's another mechanism that Google Analytics has that allows us to track these kinds of things, and they're called events. And events are a lot more flexible. So events actually, instead of just having a name, we actually have 3 different levels. So you've got basically the category. I like to kind of think of that as a name. It depends on how you set things up, but you've got a category and action label. So you've got really kind of 3 names you can work with. Again, you've got a value. I'm not sure I got some dimensions and metrics there, but anyway. So the features are you basically have an unlimited number of these. And so what's really nice is like if you're going to say something like, okay, we're going to have a category of social share. You can have the next level down be, was it Facebook, was it Twitter, was it something like that. So you're not burning all these goals on these types of things, but you're also keeping all the information of what platforms are being shared on. In particular, what's really nice is if you can track things like clickbacks and so forth, and you kind of map which platforms are being most effective from a sharing standpoint. And so you get an unlimited number of these. What is kind of nice is that with goals, you only count what happens once. You can actually look at things that happen once and if they happen multiple times. So if, for example, we set up events around social sharing, I could go in there and say, okay, for today, how many social shares did I have on Twitter? And it'll show me all of them, even if someone did multiple ones in the same page. Or I can say, give me the unique ones, which is going to basically be the same as the way goals are done. That basically says, okay, here are all the sessions that shared at least one time on Twitter. And then one of the other things that's kind of interesting is that while there's a value, Google Analytics treats this value as like a general number. It's kind of like whatever you want it to be. So for example, if you are tracking the depth that someone scrolls down a page, you might want that number to be how deep they go. You might want it to be 50, not necessarily that it's worth $1 that someone scrolled down the page. Or how deep did someone scroll into, how deep did someone watch into a video? You could have that be a percentage. You could have it be the amount of time they watched into the video, things along those lines. And so out of the box, Google Analytics doesn't do any of this. This stuff would be blank. There's no events. But you can use like Google Tag Manager, or you can use custom JavaScript to start triggering these kinds of events. And we want to be measuring all these sort of micro conversions that are going on our website. So like someone's clicking on calls to actions. Someone's sharing in social, someone's doing, someone's doing comments. So yes.
You said you can track video watches.
Yes.
Is that only if it's embedded in the website or if it's a YouTube link?
So generally it's going to be if it's embedded on the website. Now, if you really want to get ambitious, there is a way to do it, but you have to do API implementations. So you basically would have to do because the information's only over on, so basically the way like video tracking works is that you embed it on your website. And in the player, there's a whole set of JavaScript APIs to tell you like what video is playing and all this kind of stuff. And it'll only track on your website. But you can, if you really wanted to, tap into YouTube's data and actually pull that back and push it back through to Google Analytics. It's a little work to pull something like that off. But I have seen a couple clients that do things like that because they want to get the full picture of what's going on. Anyway, so maybe you want to track things like landing page views, and then we can track landing page conversions to see what our conversion rates are on our pages and so forth. So what I like to do when I'm setting up Google Analytics is setting up the goals is an absolute must. What I like to do too is score certain types of events. And so things like social sharing, commenting, things that are showing there's engagement, even things like if someone has been on this, what I call a page stick. If someone's been on this page for, say, at least a minute, or using JavaScript, it could be something like if they've been on this page for 10 seconds for every 100 words that are in this blog post, and do they scroll down through 90%, I'm going to consider that that piece of content was consumed. And so now I've got a much better measure than just how many people hit this page. And so I like to track these events and associate a business impact score, this utility score. And then I even like to track I even like to attach a utility score to traffic metrics. Now, Google Analytics out of the box doesn't support doing those utility scores on events or traffic metrics. I'll show you a hack that I like to use to kind of get around that. But it does do with goals, and goals are by far the most important. If you get anything out of this talk, it's implement goals. So what I like to do for things like social sharing, because I don't want to know if only person only does it once, I want to know if it happens multiple times. What we end up doing is I like to put an exclamation point at the end of any goal name, of any event name, where the value is meant to be interpreted as a utility value. So like I said, with a page scroll, the value might be 50%, 70%, something like that. I don't want that being interpreted. That's not meant to be dollars. But if I have something like social share, I'll say social share exclamation point, and then that might be worth 5. That is meaning $5. And I can add those up along with our goals, along with other information to start to get a better, fuller picture of what things on my website are producing value. And so kind of just as a quick example is using that technique where you've got basically, you put something like an exclamation point at the end of an event. You have kind of these regular events like a page scroll. But when I have something like someone clicks on a mail to link, and I put, actually I do the social share link, I put the exclamation point at the end, then I can build reports that'll realize that, oh, that actually should be counted as dollar values back to whatever our marketing channel is, or back to devices. So maybe what people are doing on mobile versus what people are doing on a desktop. So once we've kind of got all this scoring going on, Google Analytics is awesome that it basically attributes this back to various different types of entities or sort of inputs into your website. One of the most valuable ones, particularly for marketers, is going to be your traffic sources. And so it'll map this data back to a medium and a source. So a source is generally going to be something like, it's sort of like a category of channels. It's organic search, PPC search, social media, something along those lines. And so again, if we had 5 people or 4 people that submitted coming from organic search, those values would get mapped back to that organic, and we tell which of our efforts are doing the best. Source is normally going to be like a domain name or a site name. So like for Google, we'll just call it Google. And that way, like if you have there's 20,000 different versions of Google, like all the different countries and stuff like that, it'll bring it back to just being the domain. And there is a way to get back to the original if you want to know the difference between Google Indonesia and so forth. You also get the referral. So this is generally like if someone likes your blog post and they want to give you a link back. That's where like the referral information would come into. You do get, there's keyword information. Unfortunately, it mostly only works nowadays on PPC. Years ago, you used to get what keywords people were searching for, and then Google decided for security reasons they want to stop reporting it, but it does still come in some. But you will get it on the paid side. And then you can actually create some of your own channels. So you can do, you can kind of custom put in a campaign name or content. You actually can override any of these with custom ones. They're particularly useful, like if you ever do like a URL for like print advertising, or you're doing PPC ads or something like that, where you can control the URL. So you might have a campaign that might be, we're advertising in DFW Airport. And so basically what you do is you can have something where there's a special URL, maybe the special extension. If someone clicks that, it does a redirect to the website, and it's got the information like the campaign name, maybe copy version, something like that in the URL string. And so if you just Google UTM parameters, you learn more about like how you can kind of override and set some extra custom traffic sources. The other thing that Google Analytics will do out of the box once we're doing all of our values, it's going to map them back to all kinds of different information about our audience. Where they're located, what language they speak, browsers and OS. There's even some extended stuff where you get some information out of their ad network. And there's some permissions you have to go through to enable it, and there's a couple things you got to make sure on your website. But you get things like age, gender, people's interests. Are they interested in gardening? Are they interested in whatever? And it will, and by having all those values and scores, it'll map back. And so you might very well find out that people who are into gardening convert twice as well as people who are into hunting or something like that. So might help you change the focus of the content that you're writing. So coming to content, what it'll also do is it'll map these values back to basically the URL. It splits them up into host and path, but you can get the full thing. And so that way you can tell things like people who come in through, say, this blog post, how much value are those people producing? And so what was interesting is several years ago, we kind of built a tool that kind of brought this stuff into a website. And suddenly, we were always asking all of our developers, designers, project managers, all those kinds of people to be writing blog posts. And normally we just said, look, if you learn something that you think other people might find interesting, write about it. We didn't really do a whole lot, hey, you've got to make some sort of business impact with your writing or so forth. But suddenly, they now could see the score of what their content was producing. And without even really thinking about it, it gamified them. In fact, in particular, our lead designer at that time, who's a very competitive swimmer, back in college, she started really studying up on how do you get the most engagement from people. I was like, I want to know how much I got the shares, because she now had a score, and she can compare her score with the rest of our developers. And suddenly, all of the developers and all these people who don't necessarily know that much about the marketing side of the organization started self-organizing around what kind of business impact their content was creating. But the tricky thing kind of became, people would say, okay, well, I know that this particular piece of content is performing better than these others, but why? And people would kind of guess on different things. I said, well, what if I could set up a way to kind of measure that? Maybe it's the subject, maybe it's the length of article, maybe it's the media that we've put in the article, number of images, things like that. Maybe it's the tone we took. And so there actually is a way to do this inside of Google Analytics. There's actually a few different ways of doing it. There's things like content groupings and things like that, but I'm going to talk about one particular one called custom dimensions. And so basically a custom dimension is where you can pass extra pieces of data into Google Analytics. And you can define sort of 3 different scopes. A hit, which is basically a page. That's where you're going to want to basically, we do things like push the taxonomy of a blog post, push the author of a blog post, push really any kind of metadata that we have about a piece of content. We can push it to a custom dimension that has a hit scope. Visitor scope might be something where we say, this is someone who's bought from us before. Now, there's some back-end magic that's got to go into that a little bit. Or, you might do something like, hey, you've got a MailChimp form set up on your website, and you set using a cookie that this person is subscribed to your newsletter, and now we can push that information into Google Analytics, and we can now segment based on what people are members of the newsletter and what people aren't, what kind of behavior we're seeing. Session gets a little bit trickier. There are times that you want to use it. So where session's actually kind of nice is sort of for A/B testing. Now there are other ways to do A/B testing, but session generally means that, hey, this people for their entire session saw this variant of our website or something like that. So I won't get into that too much. We'll mostly just talk about the hit scopes and sort of the easiest to understand, the easiest to implement. The way custom dimensions work is you have to go into Google Analytics admin and you create them there. Basically, you define what you want the data to look like, what scope you want, how you want the value interpreted, some things like that. And then you use JavaScript to push that information along. And so, for example, if a blog post comes up, you basically go into Google Analytics, okay, I want something for tags, I want something for categories, I want something maybe for the length of an article, I want something for the author. Set those up, and then in JavaScript, you basically would say, okay, now when I push my page hit for my blog post, I'm going to attach that these values are set. And then once we've done that, we can now map all this stuff back to those custom things. So we might be able to look and go, hey, blog posts that are between 500 and 600 words produce more value than other types of blog posts. Or blog posts that we wrote where we got snarky rather than having a corporate voice. Just create a taxonomy and push that information through. And you can say, okay, show me all the blog posts that have a snarky voice. Show me all the ones that have a corporate voice. Show the total value, and I divide by the number of posts you have. So if you, and that way you can come up with which types are producing the most value. And so, like a lot of different things that I recommend pushing are going to be things like content types. Sections kind of the same thing. So it's sort of like, normally the content type, let's say like you've got a blog, so it's like the river of posts along with the post, that becomes the blog section. Media would normally be things like the count of how many images are in a post or how many videos are in a post, something like that. You've got your taxonomies, your categories, your tags. If you've got a multilingual site, if you've got different revisions, you can pass revisions. And I will say some of the stuff I'm not exactly sure how it works in. So some of the stuff is from the Drupal version. I mean, I still don't know exactly like how revisioning works in WordPress, stuff like that. But like in Drupal, we can push like which revision, so we see if like there's something wrong with that particular piece. You can push the author, things like the publish date. What I love about the publish date is if you're kind of clever in getting the data back out of Google Analytics, you can sit there and say, I want to compare the performance of 2 different blog posts the first week they were launched, even though one of them was launched a year ago, to see like, are we getting better at our best posts? Page intent, that's normally just like kind of a content marketing thing that something's for either for attracting, educating, it might be there, it's for educating, it's for converting, it's for telling about offers, just kind of different roles content might play. Because you might have like wiki pages and blog pages that both have the intent of attracting. And it's just a way to group those together. Text stats, these are going to be things like number of words, and could be number of words. Even do things like what's our main keyword? How many times did we use our main keyword? How many words are in the title of our content? How many times do we use our keyword in our content? So all kinds of things you can do with that. Readability scores, things like Yoast will kind of provide like that kind of data. Now, those things have to be integrated in. But the data can be gotten, and once that metadata is there, it can be passed through JavaScript back into Google Analytics. Okay, so we've gone and we've kind of basically built, kind of modeled out, created a measurement plan, and modeled all this stuff out. We've also created a bunch of new ways to segment all of our content, so we can kind of figure out not just what kind of inputs are producing the most value, but what attributes of those inputs are producing the most value. How do we use that data? So one of there's a book I read years ago, and it's really interesting because basically this guy Peter Senge, he was the director of the MIT School for Learning. Oh, it's a long name. It's a long, impressive name. But basically, it was all built around this concept of how do you create a learning organization. The idea being that in today's world, where really everyone's got sort of access to the same sort of means of capital, you've got access to a lot of the same intelligence, stuff like that it's hard to create differential advantages like based on brand and based on a lot of things that people could do in the old days. Now, the best way to create a differential advantage is to build an organization that learns faster and adapts faster than other organizations. And so I spent years studying the characteristics of great learning organizations. And some of these won't surprise us. The first one, there's 5 characteristics they came up with, and first one's personal mastery. You got smart people that know what they're doing. Mental models, and this is what kind of one of the hearts of this whole thing is that's basically meaning people have things they believe. They need to challenge those beliefs on a regular basis. So one of the things that's kind of tricky is, when I first started building websites, we would prototype out things and do UX experiments. And we'd videotape people, give them tasks to do. And now people threw money at projects, and you might spend $250,000 doing something like that, where people didn't want to spend that for an entire website. But now I feel like we've gone all the other way, where now it's just about kind of putting people in a room, people sort of do a heuristic, sort of whatever their best guess is as to what's going to make the best kind of website. And I think there's a happy medium between those, is that, yes, you do want to put some smart people into the room and use best practices that are out there to be your first cut, but it should be just an experiment. What you do after you launch, and if you're going lean, ideally launch early, and then use feedback from the data to guide how you're adjusting your website. And so that's the idea behind mental models. The other one is shared vision, basically having people in an organization talking with each other and making sure they're going in the same direction. One of the things that's great about analytics is that a lot of times, I've seen the struggle of you've got the marketing team that wants one thing, you've got the developers that want another thing, you've got the stakeholders that want certain things, you want the creative that likes to go off on their creative things. What I like to do is have the numbers organize these groups and guide them. And so, whenever, say, a designer comes up with some sort of new UX, we say, okay, what do you think the financial impact is going to be? Are we going to go up or are we going to go down when we do that? And it's interesting what people start to learn. They start to kind of come together and understand a little bit more the interplay between these different roles. Team learning. So this is, again, it's about how fast the team is learning together. But the one thing they found separated out the top learning organizations from the others is that they took a systems thinking approach. And so, systems thinking is basically this conceptual framework that, hey, we've got this black box. We don't exactly know how everything works on it, but we can adjust inputs and we can measure outputs and we can start to build theories. If we build good theories, hopefully, of how adjusting these inputs affects the outputs. And so that's the way I like to look at a website. I like to look at the website is that basically it's a black box. We don't know exactly what's going on, but we have all these inputs. We have new features we can be adding. We have creativity, we have content, traffic sources, which, some are going to be automatic, but a lot of them we try either by, PPC, display ads, or things like that. And then even our visitors, to a certain extent, we can sort of guide what kind of visitors are coming. But we don't have full control over some of these things, but other things we do. And so I like to think of all of these things as input into our black box. And then what we do is we measure the outputs. We can measure our volume metrics. Those are your stock Google Analytics metrics. How many visitors are we getting? How long are people staying on the website? Things like that. And we've got our goals, our big conversion goals. And then we've got our events that are all coming back to a single value. And what that's important is someone might say, hey, what's more important, to get a bunch of social shares or to get people downloading our ebook and subscribing to our newsletter? The value will help tell you that, because that's going to be the weighting. And then the last critical piece to this is we've got to create a feedback loop. I think one of the other big mistakes I see a lot of times in analytics is first of all, no one looks at the numbers. But the other thing another mistake I see is that one person looks at the numbers, might possibly push them up to the stakeholders, but never shares them with the developers and the marketers and the people creating the editorial calendars and things like that. So we need a good feedback loop. So reporting, what we've talked to up to this point is all that Google Analytics really has two sides to it. There's the collection side, the data that we're putting into it. So the first couple sections about the segmenting and the scoring based on goals and events, that's really about expanding the data that we're putting into Google Analytics. The other side is the reports, getting the reports out. One thing that's unfortunate is that there are, fortunate and unfortunate, there are a ton of reports in Google Analytics. Most of them are not all that useful, and the useful ones are kind of tricky to sometimes get to. And so sometimes I say take the stock reports with a grain of salt. The good thing is there are some good mechanisms for creating custom reports where you can say, okay, I want to look at all the content on my web. In fact, I did this recently. I want to look at all the content on my website, but I really want to look. I want to look at all the pages, but I really want to break it down by only blog posts. And so you can put a filter on it and say, okay, everything that's got a certain URL structure or something like that. And then I want to look at this goal that's happening or that goal or the total value or something like that. And you can create these custom reports fairly easily. And if you really get into reporting, there's always Data Studio, which is an extremely powerful tool and can bring in data from a lot of other different areas. The other thing you've got is the ability to create custom reports, which is what people have done for a lot of years. And even with these two mechanisms, you still find a lot of, there's good reasons for creating custom reports. You can export the data. There's also a fantastic data API that allows you to pull out all these different types of dimensions and segments. So one of the keys to this inspect and adapt, and it's a little agile project manager in me with that, but is one of the best places to do it is bring it into sprint planning. So in sprint planning, how many people here run on Scrum where they're doing regular sprint planning? Oh, okay. Well, good. So I'll tell you a little bit about Scrum. So basically, the idea is that your failed project is a project that you don't learn how to do better as you go along. You don't come up with better ideas as you go along. There's not necessarily a set group of features in the beginning that you can do a fixed code around or something like that. So normally what you have is you have a bunch of user stories that are sort of these ideas of roughly what you want to do, and you prioritize them into a backlog. And then like every 2 weeks or so, you would sit down and the team would say, okay, we can take these 5 at the top and we're going to turn them into working software over the next 2 weeks, and then we're going to show it off. But a lot of times, sprint planning, who makes the final decisions on what gets into the sprint backlog is the product owner. And even if you're doing more traditional waterfall, it's roughly, there's normally a product owner that's kind of managing this stuff. But what I love to do is bring this data and say, hey, last time we made these changes. Here's the delta we saw from the previous sprint release to this sprint's release. And so use that to help guide the prioritization, not just necessarily what the product owner thinks are the most important things. The other one that's great, and it's kind of a modified version of sprint planning, is editorial calendar planning. So I know a lot of organizations, they might, like once a month, they're going to sit down with their editorial, with their authoring team, and they're going to talk about what articles they should write. Maybe they're getting ideas, from their support people, from forums, online, keyword research, SEO type things, but also bring the data in to say, hey, yeah, well, we just wrote this article that's about, this particular topic. Or a great one was, I remember someone wrote an article about the GDPR stuff like a year and a half before the GDPR launched. They had no idea that was skyrocketing. And so someone should have been bringing that data in and go, okay, this is a hot area that maybe we should be writing some things about. And then if you're with an organization that doesn't do these things regularly, at least try to set up monthly, quarterly, or at a minimum, an annual review. What's nice about a lot of stuff you set up Google Analytics right is even if you're doing a project where someone's like, let's build a website and let's just launch it. And we don't want to do any more on it. If you set up the analytics and just go spend a few hours looking at it 6 months later or a year later, you'll likely come back with a whole lot of ideas to go back to a client and recommend that they should be doing. And it's interesting when you've got all that data, you can spend time digging through it. One of my favorite places to put this data is the WordPress admin. It's where the authors live. It's where a lot of people who are working with the website, like going back to my story about our developers and they were all blogging, and because the data was in the WordPress admin, they now had access to it. It maximized the transparency with them. There's a few different ways of doing that. So and then really just how do we adapt? I like to treat every change on the website as it's data driven. Not just, hey, is that a good idea? But everything we're doing, okay, we're going to make this change, and now we want to measure the change in value produced on the website. And sometimes, particularly if you're doing UX changes, that might very well be just noting that, hey, we launched this feature on this day. Let's look at the 4 weeks before that. Let's look at the 4 weeks after that. But because we've got business value coming through as a number, we can track what that means. Okay. You want to regularly analyze to uncover high-value producing inputs and segments. So inputs can be like a piece of content, and segments, again, are going to be things like the lengths of articles, authors, things along those lines. And then use value to focus the team and prioritize. Let's just not do things because it's the cool new thing to do, or it's a thing I just learned about at this conference. Designers love to do that kind of stuff. Let's think about let's always be focused on what's going to be the business impact. We're going to be focused on do more of what works and throw out more of what doesn't. So for several years, we implemented these kinds of frameworks by hand, and say like from 2004 through 2011 or 12 or so. And then eventually we're like, we need to build a tool to do this. This is getting pretty complex to go back and forth. And so we actually, in Drupal, we created a module called Intelligence, which we've since brought over into WordPress. And I was just going to show you a little bit about what it does. But it's mainly there because one of the tricky parts about, and I actually didn't think about it until I was talking with another agency an agency owner a few years ago. And he said, the problem with doing analytics is you've got to be an expert in a lot of different things. You've got to be an expert in data. You've got to be kind of an expert in JavaScript, and maybe not an expert because I'm not exactly expert in JavaScript, but I can get around it. You've got to understand things like content. You've got to understand, so you've got to be kind of part technical, part marketer, but also part data-driven. And so, I normally argue that's a technical marketer, but good technical marketers are hard to find, particularly ones that can actually do development. So we try to streamline this process and make it, make this stuff easier. So like one of the things we brought in is where now you've got a whole bunch of different events that are in code. In fact, like if someone made a theme, there's APIs for all this stuff. So if someone was building a theme, they could actually build their own their own events into their theme that then would just start automatically working on whatever website they're on, and they would show up in this list. So it's just a kind of a little quick video. I wish I had done this. I did this with Contact Form 7, given that we've got Gravity Forms guys in here. I wish I'd done this with Gravity Forms. But again, like one of the biggest things you want to track is going to be form submissions. We need to make it really easy to do that. So normally to do a goal in Google Analytics, you're going to have to run over to Google Analytics, do the configuration for a goal, and then you've got to set up the JavaScript or do something like that. So we just want a system where, and there's a way through the API that we can create goals over in Google Analytics. So we want to track this form as a goal contact form, and we want to track it as a value of 100. And so we can just go to a form, and it just went and created that over in Google Analytics. And now we can it's a drop-down box that says we want to track this form this way, and it'll automatically start tracking that form, regardless of whether it's a redirect or whether it's a message that comes back on the screen, because you'd have to do this two different ways, kind of if you're doing it manually. Also, one way that you can see all your values, and so like kind of out of the box, it's going to be things like, here are your goals that we might say are bigger things worth 100. You can adjust them all in one place. Here are your more micro goals. So form submission, things like if someone read a page, they watched deeply enough into a video, they shared things in social media, things like that. And then if you want to, you can even do like certain traffic things. So like you might say, I want to associate a real small value for every visitor we have. If they stick, we might want to have a slightly larger value. Every page they hit after that, we might want a different value. And then we track all that stuff back. And then one of the big things we want to do is bring these reports into WordPress. Actually, it was interesting. When we did this in Drupal, there really wasn't much like that. There are some things in WordPress that do this, but they're bringing back like plain vanilla Google Analytics stuff. And so what we want to do is do reports that got people focused on the value, the business value that was being produced. So like this would be, say, a scorecard for an entire website. It's giving you a summary of all the different important goals and events, all the different important traffic sources. And then we do things like, let's look at all the top content and let's sort it by the value that it's producing. And then each piece of content, again, trying to give transparency to people authoring, you could just simply go to a tab and say, I want to look at the page report for this particular piece of content. And you're now basically getting a scorecard that's filtered down to just things that have happened involving that piece of content. So you can kind of compare, kind of get more of a micro or more details about what's going on with that piece of content. And then this is one kind of some of my favorite areas we talked about doing the segmentation. Is a little bit blurry to read, but for example, this is breaking up. This is just figuring out value by content type. This is by authors. So we buy content too, and we always know what are we paying someone for content, what kind of value are they producing, and so we figure out like who our most valuable authors were, and we also reward our own internal employees if by producing a certain amount of value and so forth. This is a report we did by the number of words. So we found that our the most effective blog posts were the 500 to 600 words, because we didn't want to just measure from an SEO standpoint, like what's the right length to rank well in the search engines. We want to know what's the best way for the overall impact of a piece of content. And that's probably one website. Normally it's a little bit longer than that. Normally it's more than 1,000 to 1,200 words, and that sounds this way. And then this is things like taxonomy. So content marketing was producing the most value. Followed by SEO. Like I said, the words were kind of blurry, but then we'd start to figure out like what kinds of things should we be writing about. So anyway, so that is that's how we see kind of extending Google Analytics to actually produce actionable data. So any questions?
How do you define if somebody sticks? What does that mean?
So, okay, so Google Analytics actually does have a built-in stick mechanism, but it's a little flawed. The way it works is that if someone comes to a page and then goes to at least, they have to go to one other page, right? Or if a event is triggered, it gets a little bit technical, but it's what's called a special type of event. There's a certain flag. And so now, of course, events, you have to customize them on your website. What we like to do, the one thing that I don't like about that is that someone can come to your website, be on there for 5 minutes, read an entire blog post, and leave, and Google would still consider that a bounce. So what I like to do is a stick is just the reverse of a bounce. There's an analytics system like years ago we called sticks, and so try to be more on the positive side than the negative side. But one of the extra things we like to add in is if someone actually read that piece of content, we're now going to trigger an event that says they consumed that piece of content. So now Google Analytics will no longer consider that a bounce, and so now it's a stick. And then we also do things like, there's a lot of little corrections in Google Analytics, things like people can go and open pages in hidden tabs, and Google Analytics will count the time they're on that page. So there's like little corrections we like to do there. It's like, no, don't count it if the page is invisible, which can play in some of the stick stuff also. Yeah?
How can you allocate like a marketing spend? So I have a contact form 7 sign up form that passes UTM parameters through. Mm-hmm. So it sounds like I need that intelligence plug in there to make it easier for me. But how can I then still have those UTM parameters come through and attach like spend dollars to those sources?
Okay, great question. They just work. So the value, so basically the way to look at it, event's almost like a page hit in a sense. So basically the session is defined. The traffic sources for the session are defined by your UTM parameters, right?
Yep.
Then when you say something like, oh, we want to trigger a goal when this form is submitted, well, that's just seen as something that happens during the session. So and we say, okay, this goal happened and it's worth 100, it's going to be mapped back to all those UTM parameters. I don't know if that makes sense. It's kind of just happens automatically, the magic of Google.
Well, I guess I'm looking at the reverse. I know you can assign a value, but is there a way I can assign like an overall spend to see what my cost would be per conversion?
Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying. So that would have to be done, at this point, that'd have to be done manually. And one of the things actually that I'm trying to do with this project is, so in Drupal we kind of built it out to do a whole lot of stuff, and we kind of brought over like the core of what we wanted to do, and then wanted to get feedback from the community as far as like what kind of features they think are the most important. And like that's one of the ones I've thought about is associating a spend, so then you really are kind of getting more like a true ROI value than just, hey, it produced this value. But for now, yeah, what you'd end up having to do is you just produce the report and say, here's this much value, and then just know, yeah, we spent this much on it. And the same thing even with like content writers. You might want to say, hey, this piece of content cost us $25 or something like that, and then yeah, you would have more like an ROI, like a profit margin that's being reported. And that's the cool thing you do, like Data Studio too, is you can bring, like if you've got it, like you can bring with, say if it's a Google platform, you can bring Google Ads data in and then map it to your values for what's being spent. But Data Studio takes a while to kind of learn and get through. Any other questions?
Do you have any other tools you like besides Google? Like some of the other crawler type alternatives that you find useful?
So Crazy Eggs, one we always kind of liked from like just mapping. And actually what's interesting is a lot of what we try to do, what I do love is a lot of the marketing automation platforms, HubSpot, Marketo, Eloqua, Pardot, things like that. Great analytics that go beyond like things like tracking if we're going to, how many times a CTA is shown, how many times it's clicked on, and then how many times the people actually convert after the click. And actually a big part of why we created this was for that reason. We had clients that were implementing the systems that are thousands of dollars a month, and they'd want to switch. We're going to lose all that data if they switch. So like, let's just put it into a general container of Google Analytics. And that way, when we switch from one type of system to the other system, we just maintain the same statistics. But good, and the thing about it is, so it was interesting, when I first started this project in like 13, I didn't think I could do this all in Google Analytics. And then when I started looking at it, I'm like, no, there's a lot of customization capabilities. So I think a lot of it is more like, how do we blow out what's possible in Google Analytics, use all these extended features. But I do like things like Crazy Egg. Sometimes, a lot of times I actually do like to do like A/B testing with Google Experiments. But yeah, their new A/B testing platform's great. And then sometimes we'll use like Visual Web Optimizer. normally for like lighter types of A/B testing. So those are two, as far as from like an analytics standpoint, those are two that are kind of, off the top of my head.
So in open source, any suggestions on moving out of Google Maps?
Ooh,
The pricing's gone a little bit.
has it?
Last July, it was a 1,400% increase.
Really?
Yeah, it went from 7 CPM
Yeah.
to, yeah, it's broken a lot of nonprofit websites. Because,
Really?
well, I mean, you get a monthly credit, but if you've got, let's say, 25,000 calls,
Yeah.
and a call, an address can have 3 calls now.
Right.
So you have 8,000 visitors, and you're trying to give AIDS testing centers,
Right.
They've had to disable.
I
mean, and you have to have a credit card attached.
I would know what to do in Drupal. There's a whole system called Layers that basically is like a whole mapping system. But I'm not sure in WordPress what would be equivalent to Google Maps. Now, if you're a nonprofit, I know a lot of times Google's very, gives nonprofits all kinds of good thresholds.
Well, what they did, they leveled everything last.
Oh, did they?
That's what they did,
Yeah.
So, for the nonprofits, no, but there's Mapbox and Open Layers, TomTom, so.
Yeah, so Open Layers, I think that's all, I know like in Drupal, that's how that layer system works. So yeah, and it's an open source project, and so yeah, that sounds like there might be an integration for that. That's actually really interesting and super powerful, particularly if you're ever doing like open data type work. It's been a little while since I've worked with it though. But I would give that a shot if that's what it's doing, if it's working with the Open Layers project. That's a really cool project.
The underlying project is OpenStreetMap.org. And if you look for WordPress integrations with OpenStreetMap, that's replacing a lot of Google Maps for just that reason.
Yeah, I looked at that. But they're also pricey.
It depends on what the underlying data is free, so it depends on who your provider is. So it gets it gets a little weird as to how that works, but there are solutions out there.
Okay, this is helpful?
Yeah.
Maybe you have some good ideas? Good. I rearranged the whole thing today. Yes?
If you wanted to measure a phone number,
Yes.
opposed to a form, so what would that be?
Okay, so that can get pretty tricky. So actually just measuring a phone call, the way we normally handle it, and this is actually a feature we have in Drupal we haven't brought over into WordPress yet, and there are systems you can buy. The way we handled it is that we use a system called Twilio. And so what ends up happening is Twilio is kind of like a general framework for building what's called an IVR. And so what you do is you buy phone numbers. And so the first thing you've got to do is you've got to switch out to one of these tracking phone numbers. And then the way we would normally implement that is that whenever that phone number gets called, it would actually call a URL from the website, and we'd send back either a JSON or we'd send back a JSON response and say, okay, forward this number to this. And when we did that, there's something called server-side Google Analytics. So basically then we would trigger a call server-side. What gets really tricky is when the one bad thing about that approach, you'll get the goal over in Google Analytics, but it'll be seen as a completely separate session from the person visiting your website. There are some ways, but they get kind of hacky where you have to assign each person their own phone number. Which if you're not getting a ton of traffic, it's not that bad. But then you can sit there and say, okay, well, this session ID in Google Analytics was assigned this phone number, and if we see a call come in from that, then we're going to associate that session together. So it can get kind of tricky. Like I said, there's other systems out there for doing it. I just always liked the flexibility of doing the Twilio system. You do a lot of cool stuff with it. Yeah, I've got a client right now that's a nightmare we're trying to deal with because it's a franchise system. So there's 800 franchises on the website. It's we'd have to go get individual, and then each phone number routes to those things. To get sessions to match, we'd have to go basically give every person a unique number for every franchise they hit to make sure it gets routed properly. That or you got to use an IVR to say something like press this number to get to this, and we can register it that way. But yeah. In certain scenarios, it can get pretty tricky fully tracking phone calls. The other thing on mobile is you can use click to call to kind of give you a rough estimate of what that is. Cool.
You've just watched a video from our WordPress St. Petersburg meetup. We meet twice a month on the first and third Tuesdays in downtown St. Pete at the Suncoast Developers Guild. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up on YouTube and be sure to subscribe and click the bell to be notified when new videos are added. You can find out more about our meetups at our website at tampabaywp.org.